Okay, the first video prepared what I want to get into here, which is the interchange, exchange, and alternation between major and minor pentatonic scales, which sounds a lot more complicated than it really is. So this is just a matter of learning two different scales, major, G major pentatonic, and G minor pentatonic. So then when we play over this blues, three-chord blues setting, we can choose riffs or musical phrases that alternate between major and minor. So what I'll do here is give some specific examples of riffs that you can use that exemplify the sound of major moving to minor, and conversely, the sound of minor moving to major. Everything's directional and everything moves in both directions. First thing is to memorize the scales, major and minor. Pentatonics in both directions. So if I play them just like this in their proper sequence, we can hear contrast just between the scale tones that are played in their proper sequence, right? Let's say I start with minor this time and end with major. So the first way, moving from major to minor, sounds like we're moving into more of a melancholic or blue mood here. It's blue because it's out of tune. Out of tune equals dissonant. Disagreement, harmonic disagreement equals blues. And harmonic disagreement is what makes the blues and rock and roll sound so interesting. It's a form of rebellion, and what's being rebelled against is traditional music theory, which states that all the notes of the major scale are the notes that you use when you're in a major key, and all the notes of the minor scale are the notes that you use when you're in a minor key. So we broke the rules here because we're borrowing notes basically from parallel minor to be played over a 1-4-5 progression in major. So blues is a 1-4-5 progression, right? We all know what that is, 1-4-5. 1, 4, and 5 are all represented by major chords. Major chords. They're not all dominant 7th chords, though. They're not all dominant 7th chords. So something's being superimposed here when we play the B flat, because that's not in the G scale. The D9, however, is in the G scale. That's called 5 dominant, relates to Mixolydian, a 5-7 chord. D is the 5th note of G, so D9 is a 5-7 chord of G major. 4 dominant is imposing a dominant on a major 7th chord. So normally we play like G major 7, C major 7 are the 1 and 4 chords. 1 and 4 major 7, and then 5 is dominant 7. So you can think of the blues progression, the 1-4-5, as conforming to the rules of music theory. But we're creating some other types of chords which are known as secondary dominants by making the one chord a 7th chord, right? Because the F is not in the G major scale. F is a dominant 7. So that's a note that's being forced on the G tonality, or the G major scale. And then for the C9 chord, we have B flat, which also is not in the G major scale. So we're forcing these notes on the scale, and they're creating dominant chords, because we want to play over dominant chords, a 1-4-5 progression that uses all dominants. So the only chord here that is diatonic or that uses the scale tones of G major is D9, the 5 chord. Okay, now I'll give a few examples here in this video of how to change directions, let's say. So one thing that we can use too is some chromaticism. Sometimes I like to play notes that are in between the scale tones. The first thing we're thinking about is major pentatonic here. Okay, we could get into playing the arpeggios of dominant 7 chords, which is another big part of it, but for now we'll just stay with the pentatonics, and I'll think of some riff that I could normally play over the blues. Use maybe a passing tone. So even this is a minor to major. It's happening fast, but it also sounds like minor to major, G minor to G major. Okay. That's just a plain G major triad, which also is in the pentatonic, right? So these notes, like Hendrix played these notes, all this is all major sounds. Typical major. So I'll start with this one. Here's a ascending major with a passing tone, but then we get into 3, 5, 6, 1. So now I've reached the highest string, and I'll descend using the minor pentatonic. So you see how I made music by starting with major and finishing with minor. The second I played a note that was not in the G major scale, it created a nice contrast, took us somewhere else. So that's an example of using major ascending and then minor descending, right? There's a lot of different ways to do this, of course, right? So that's a major. Then I'm going to come back with a minor. So it went from happy to sad or light to dark, right? Because of those blue tones, the B flat and the F, which are not in the scale, right? So if I want to go from light to dark or happy to sad, I'll ascend with major, descend with minor. There's the major. So there we go, major, and then minor. Very effective. The other way of doing this would be to start out with like the darker minor sound, which most people associate now with the blues. We've gotten used to hearing that. So it sounds correct to us to hear the blue tones, but it's incorrect. It would get you thrown out of a musical conservatory to play blue notes. Okay, so let's say that I'm playing over the same major sounds, but I'm going to start with an ascending minor. Now, usually I think of minor as just naturally descending and major as naturally ascending because of the harmonic and subharmonic series. Physical laws teach us that major ascends and minor descends. So it sounds the best to go major and then minor, right? But you also have the option of ascending with minor. So there's the minor. Being played over major. Right, so there we go. There's okay, there we go. Went from sad to resolving. So it forms a resolution when you go from minor to major, because major is like our home base, right? But you always have this option of ascending with major and then descending with minor, or vice versa, ascending with minor and then descending with major, which also works.